Next, on Currents News, the fight for religious freedom is far from over. What's next for the Diocese of Brooklyn and beyond? Then, a first in more ways than one. Cardinal Wilton Gregory becomes the first African-American prelate to receive the red hat. Plus, another drug maker applies for emergency authorization. Could millions of doses of COVID vaccines be available in time for Christmas? And in a major reversal, New York City public schools are going to reopen. What the plan looks like is coming up. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. A landmark decision. That's what one member of the Diocese of Brooklyn's legal team is calling it. The Supreme Court decided to side with the diocese in its fight with the state of New York, but the battle is far from over. Currents News' Emily Druby reports on what's next and how this could affect other states.
It's significant, I think even a landmark decision.
That's attorney Akiva Shapiro, part of the Diocese of Brooklyn's legal team. He says the Supreme Court injunction could have far-reaching effects, not just for New York, but for religious institutions around the country.
They were not treating us equally as others. We became non-essential, and so that became the problem.
The ruling specifically pertaining to restrictions in red and orange COVID hotspot zones where houses of worship were capped at 10 or 25 people. They say more could safely fit inside.
We did try to negotiate with the state before we did this. We asked them, look, take into account the size of our buildings. Then we limited on that basis, but they refused even to negotiate or even talk about that. So that we had no choice.
Now the lawsuit goes back to the appeals court. A hearing is scheduled for December 18th. Governor Cuomo claiming the ruling is irrelevant because the diocese no longer has churches in the red or orange zones.
The zone that they were talking about has already been moot. It expired last week. So I think this was really just an opportunity for the court to express its philosophy and politics.
But Bishop DiMarzio argues that could change at any time, and this protects them.
Because although, as the governor said, it was mute because they changed the zones, but they could put the zones in tomorrow.
It was a 5-4 decision with Justice Amy Coney Barrett in the majority.
Up until this moment, the Supreme Court, and therefore the lower courts, had been entirely deferential to state and local governments, no matter how severe the restrictions were on religious liberties.
Akiva adds now the Supreme Court is saying the Constitution must be considered when states put restrictions into place.
If there are other states out there that are doing the same thing, that are imposing stricter requirements and restrictions on houses of worship, those restrictions are now subject to challenge under this ruling.
Since the pandemic began, religious institutions in states across the country have brought up lawsuits pertaining to COVID restrictions. In California, Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of the Archdiocese of San Francisco has already voiced strong concern against new restrictions in their state that ban indoor worship services, mentioning this New York ruling. While in New Jersey, the Supreme Court has intervened in a similar situation, demanding the state respond to a lawsuit brought on by a synagogue and a church. Emily Druby, Currents News.
The Diocese of Brooklyn has been taking every safety precaution since churches reopened to make sure worshipers stay safe. When parishes opened their doors, only 25% were allowed inside, and those who returned were under strict social distancing. Everyone must also wear a face mask. The liturgy also changed because of COVID. No entrance procession for any mass. Music must be limited to the organist and cantor, and the cantor cannot sing at the same place where the lector reads. All reading material, such as missals or worship aids, were removed from the pews. The handshake during the sign of peace, strictly forbidden. And the Diocese of Brooklyn, after no longer offering the precious blood, strongly recommended that parishioners receive communion by hand only. The High Court will also weigh in on the Trump administration's efforts to bar undocumented immigrants from being included in the census totals. The challengers to the president's July directive argue the new numbers could leave several million people uncounted and cause California, Texas, and New Jersey to lose House seats. There are an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. The U.S. bishops are strongly against leaving undocumented immigrants out. In a statement, the conference wrote, denying the undocumented and the states in which they reside their rightful representation in Congress is counter to the Constitution and makes people feel invisible and not valued as human beings. The Church's teaching is clear. Human dignity is most sacred regardless of legal status. The Supreme Court in New York State is siding with Catholic schools, a judge ruling that the Department of Education must legally provide schools in the Archdiocese of New York with the same COVID testing as public schools. Under Governor Cuomo's restrictions, schools in yellow zones must randomly test 20% of school staff and students in order to stay open. Schools in the Archdiocese serve around 62,000 students from pre-K to 12th grade. And still ahead, Bishop Thomas Daly, the frontman for the U.S. bishops' efforts to help Catholic schools, will join us. He outlines the struggles and successes schools are having during this pandemic later in this newscast. New York City public school students will start returning to the classroom next week.
What has happened is we've proven the schools could be extraordinarily safe. I mean, the schools are some of the safest places to be right now in New York City, which is a credit to our educators and our staff and our parents.
Mayor Bill de Blasio says on Monday, December 7th, pre-K, elementary, and special education students can return to school. This just 10 days after shutting down all of the schools. The mayor says students will be tested every week. Middle and high school students will return after the new year. And one other thing, many parents will have the option to send their kids to school for in-person learning 5 days a week. Meanwhile, Governor Andrew Cuomo says the holiday season could have a big impact on the number of COVID cases in the state.
When people started to travel for the holiday season, when they started to travel for Thanksgiving, when students started to go home, when people started to shop, when they started to move around, increased mobility, increased social activity, increased viral infection rate. It is directly proportionate.
Cuomo says the Thanksgiving weekend actually started a 37-day holiday period, and he reiterated what Dr. Anthony Fauci said about there being a surge on the surge. We're getting closer to that vaccine. Pharmaceutical giant Moderna is applying for emergency use authorization of its coronavirus vaccine, which it says is 94% effective at preventing COVID-19. The same data indicates it's 100% effective at preventing severe cases. Pfizer already applied for authorization. A number of critical decisions on the potential vaccines are set to happen between now and the end of the year. And on Monday, White House Coronavirus Response Coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx hoped to brief Joe Biden's administration on America's response to the pandemic.
We've spent the last 9 months really developing sophisticated databases that are bringing together information from across the country down to the county level. We can see who's being admitted. We can see who's getting sick. We can see where this virus is moving in communities.
On Tuesday, December 1st, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Vaccines will hold an emergency meeting. Rick Bright, a Biden COVID-19 advisory board member, says it's a good sign.
They will have further discussions on how to prioritize that vaccine, primarily because we know that the vaccine will be available in very limited doses.
On December 10th, an FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee will consider Pfizer's vaccine for emergency use authorization. Moderna says its FDA hearing will be held a week later on December 17th. The FDA says approval could take days or even weeks. Some experts say at the earliest, vaccinations for those deemed priority could begin by the 12th or 13th. By the end of the year, health experts say there should be enough doses of a COVID-19 vaccine for 20 million people. As the projected winner of the presidential race, Joe Biden is announcing his top cabinet picks. This as the General Services Administration has now signed off on the official process. The team consists of several members from the past 2 Democratic administrations, including Janet Yellen for Treasury Secretary. The former chair of the Federal Reserve would be the first woman to head the Treasury Department. And Alejandro Mayorkas, the son of Cuban immigrants, making him the first Latino and immigrant to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. There's been a horrific attack in Nigeria. At least 110 people in a small village have been killed. Boko Haram, a jihadist group, is being blamed for the most recent attack that took place just outside the capital city, Maiduguri. Most of the victims were farmers working their rice fields. The United Nations says there are also reports that several women may have been kidnapped. A mass funeral was held for victims of the massacre. There has been no claim of responsibility for the attack. There's a lot more news headed your way. History in the making. Pope Francis creates 13 new cardinals, including Wilton Gregory, America's first African-American cardinal. Then we'll talk to the USCCB's new chair on Catholic education about how kids can strengthen their faith during these difficult times. And it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. The White House unveils its holiday-themed decorations. We'll take you on a virtual tour.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
It was an important moment in history as 13 new cardinals were named during a consistory attended in person and virtually this past weekend in Rome. Among them, the first African-American cardinal, Washington Archbishop Wilton Gregory. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has more.
A historic moment for the Catholic Church and Catholics across the United States. Washington Archbishop Wilton Gregory is the first ever African-American cardinal.
It's a sign to the African-American community that the Catholic Church has a great reverence and respect and esteem for my people, people of color.
Cardinal Gregory and 12 others were given their red hats by Pope Francis during a consistory in Rome on November 28th. During his homily, Pope Francis reminded the newly named cardinals to stay humble and that their positions are first and foremost as servants of God.
E tu non sarai più il pastore vicino al popolo. Sentirai di essere soltanto l'eminenza. Quando tu sentirai quello, sarai fuori strada.
And that theme continued in the Holy Father's homily the day after the consistory, when he celebrated Advent Mass with the new cardinals.
E se siamo attesi in cielo, perché vivere di pretese terrene? Perché affannarci per un po' di soldi, un po' di fama, un po' di successo? Tutte cose che passano.
At both gatherings, there were plenty of signs of the times and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Many attended the consistory virtually, including 2 new cardinals who weren't allowed to travel. The cardinals from outside Europe were tested for COVID-19 and were required to quarantine for 10 days once arriving in Rome.
Drammatiche circostanze che la Chiesa e il mondo stanno attraversando ci sfidano ad offrire una lettura della pandemia che aiuti tutti e ciascuno a cogliere in questa tragedia anche l'opportunità.
Along with his new title, Cardinal Gregory and the 127 other cardinals who are under the age of 80 is now eligible to enter a conclave to elect a new pope. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
And following the consistory, the Holy Father and the new cardinals visited the Pope Emeritus, Benedict XVI. The cardinals sat down and sang Salve Regina together, this after being introduced one by one to the Pope Emeritus. Benedict expressed his joy for the visit and blessed each of the new cardinals before they left. Earlier this month, the USCCB elected a new chairman of the Committee on Catholic Education, who hopes to help Catholic schools focus on their mission to strengthen the faith foundation, especially during this pandemic. Bishop Thomas Daly from the Diocese of Spokane joins us now. And Bishop Daly, you'll be starting your new role at a crucial time for Catholic schools. Declining enrollment was already causing many Catholic schools across the country to close. The pandemic just added more economic challenges. And as you know, our schools did not get much help from the CARES Act relief package. So what's the plan moving forward to help our schools stay afloat?
Well, the first is to be able to secure, if possible, assistance for the PPE and other issues, testing. I know, again, the Archdiocese of New York was ruled in their favor to be able to do that. We haven't yet faced that challenge here in Eastern Washington, but again, I'm very conscious of the fact that the most immediate pressing issues, of course, are the health and safety of our students and their families, and of course, the economic well-being. But beyond that, I think the pandemic has really given us a providential opportunity to really examine why we have our Catholic schools. In the midst of so much illness and difficulty and hardship and really despair, we are beloved sons and daughters of Jesus Christ, and no educational environment provides that in a foundation, in its lived reality than the Catholic schools.
Absolutely. Now, what about the coronavirus testing in Catholic schools? You mentioned already, and we've been reporting about the Archdiocese of New York, which sued the New York City Department of Education to provide that testing for Catholic school students, just as it does for public school students. So do you think the state and the city governments have to do more to help our Catholic schools?
Absolutely. We're talking about the health and well-being, and the attitude of that being the top priority, saying that at one time in the early days of the pandemic that religious services were not essential. We've seen that. They are essential, and all education, whether in private schools, Catholic schools, or public schools, we're talking about the health of our young people and their families. So it is something that it is a matter of justice. Our Catholic school parents pay taxes. They support the public schools. We also provide an education. And this is something that doesn't have anything to do with faith. It is the safety and well-being. And I believe it is a matter of what is just.
Sure. Now, there is a silver lining to the pandemic here in the Diocese of Brooklyn schools. The procedures that were put in place to keep the students safe actually led to an increase in enrollment. The public school parents started putting their kids in our Catholic schools. So have you seen that trend in other areas of the country?
We have, even in my diocese of Spokane, Washington, because of limits on who can come, we have waiting lists. And I think this is allowing for our parents to say, why are schools important? Catholic schools, we educate in the great tradition of Jesus, let the children come to me. No one has that but the church. And maybe we are helping our parents to say, this is a priority. As much as we're doing this interview via computer or Skype or virtual, there's nothing like the personal contact. And our Catholic schools are really relational learning. And that is something maybe our parents are now coming to see is worth that sacrifice.
Sure, especially for those younger children. Bishop Thomas Daly, USCCB Chairman for the Committee on Catholic Education, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. God bless.
The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season has officially ended Monday, and for the tens of millions of Americans who found themselves in the paths of this year's tropical storms, it couldn't come soon enough. There were 30 named storms in total, with a record 12 storms making landfall across 7 states. And the U.S. isn't alone. The last 2 hurricanes to make landfall this season proved to be among the most powerful. Eta and Iota battered Nicaragua and other Central American countries as Category 4 storms just 13 days apart. Still to come on Currents News, St. Peter's Square is being adorned with a Christmas tree all the way from the forests of Slovenia, and she's a beauty. We'll show you. Then to the nation's capital for a virtual tour with the First Lady as she reveals her holiday-themed decor, including an 18-foot Christmas tree and a tribute to the frontline workers battling the pandemic. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. The White House is all decked out in red and green. First Lady Melania Trump giving us a virtual tour of all the Christmas splendor in this video posted to Twitter. She went with a traditional style of decor, lots of trees with white lights and red ornaments. There's also a close-up shot of a village hospital, a tribute to frontline workers amid the pandemic. The theme this year, America the Beautiful. The Vatican says Pope Francis will not take part in an annual Marian tradition. Every year on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the Holy Father visits Rome's Piazza di Spagna to venerate the statue of Mary there. But Vatican officials say the Pope won't go this year because the pontiff doesn't want people gathering and spreading the virus. Instead, the Bishop of Rome will celebrate the feast day with an act of private devotion, entrusting the Holy City to Our Lady. At the same time, the Vatican wants its Christmas decorations to be a sign of hope against COVID-19. The Christmas tree was hoisted into place on Monday. The 91-foot-tall spruce comes from Slovenia. The country sent it to the Vatican to celebrate 30 years of independence. It will be decorated and displayed outside of St. Peter's Basilica until January 10th. The Diocese of Brooklyn will be holding its annual tree lighting next week. The event happening at 5 p.m. on December 8th at Grand Army Plaza. Also happening that night, a Vatican statue will be blessed in Brooklyn. A replica of the Angels Unawares sculpture, which was first commissioned by the Pope to show the plight of refugees in St. Peter's Square, is traveling the United States before returning to its permanent home on the Catholic University campus in 2021. Melissa Butts caught up with the artist of the Vatican work shortly after his piece was presented to the world by the Pope. He explains the meaning of the sculpture and the work that went into the massive project.
Canadian sculptor Timothy Schmalz had a moment most artists only dream of. His work of art was presented to the Pope.
The piece was unveiled by refugees, and Pope Francis, the first time he actually saw the larger version of it, I couldn't speak Spanish, I don't speak Italian, and he knew that, and so what he did was he looked at me and he put his hands on his heart, and it was just one of the most amazing moments of my life as a sculptor.
He says the idea for Angels Unaware came after he read Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. The sculpture is a boat with 140 figures inside, representing migration from every race and period of time, with an angel in the center. Timothy said the angel's presence represents another factor.
In a sense, all the people on that ship become an angel. It's fascinating because at a glance, you see contemporary refugees shoulder to shoulder against some of the historical movements of people, like the Jews escaping Nazi Germany, like the Irish with the potato famine leaving to North America.
Timothy admits once the idea came to him, he worked on it 7 days a week and finished within the year.
It wasn't till I was basically finished that project that I got one of the most amazing emails, and that is that Pope Francis wants to install it in St. Peter's Square. And for me, a Christian artist, that is just unbelievable, because I like to think that artwork is an instrument or a tool for something else.
This work of art is now accessible to every tourist passing through Rome as a reminder that all life is sacred and the migration process has existed historically since the beginning of time. Melissa Butts, Currents News.
And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.